So let's talk about Reading Festival 2019. This year was a belter. I enjoyed myself, and I challenge anyone that went this year who is putting out these videos about them moaning about the lineup and saying it's really bad to say otherwise, because this year was absolutely great fun. I saw a record amount of bands. And if you want to hear more about that, then I've done a podcast with my little brother, and I've popped a little link in the description below which you can learn more. But what I want to do is make a quick video about some of the acts that I think are going to headline next year. The Enemy have done a great article on this, and E-Festivals, which is a very, very popular festival site, have made some strong, put some strong rumours up already. So let's talk through that. I mean, first of all, let's talk about headlining acts. So usually, to headline Reading Festival, there's a few rules the festival public tend to follow when booking a headline act. Those are changing more and more. I mean, historically, there would be a big rock act that, you know, over the last few years, we've seen people like Eminem, and we've seen people like Kendrick Lamar, which I think is challenging that, and I think is in a very good way. I still think both of them have earned their space on that festival. They're very much popular and yet alternative artists, regardless of if they rap or play guitar. But the main rules that you tend to follow is that you can't have headlined in the last 4 years. I mean, that tends to be the rule. There are exceptions of this. Fall Out Boy last headlined in 2016, and they also headlined this year. The other rule tends to be that you need 3 albums out. Again, it's the tends to be. It's a bit like the Festival Republic stage tends to be either 1 or no albums. Very rarely will you see someone on the NME tent with no albums out. That's by no means set in stone. But if you look at the majority of the headline acts at the point that they headlined, they tend to have had 3 albums out. The first time Arctic Monkeys headlined, the year they released their 3rd album. This was the same for Paramore. The biggest exception to that rule was with Disclosure, who only had 2 albums. They also played in 2016. They co-headlined, so perhaps you could argue that there's something there, but they tend to be the main rules. So let's look at who we think that could be. So if you would rule out all of the artists from the last 4 years, and you were to look at people who are, number 1, touring, or have just released a new album, or who are just about to release their 3rd album, then you might get a good idea of who we think could be headlining Ridgefield Avenue next August. So first of all, the strongest rumour, which is always the strongest rumour of Reading because they're probably the biggest rock band in the entire world, is Foo Fighters. Foo Fighters! Foo Fighters last headlined in 2012 and have headlined many times before. This wouldn't be a new one for them. It would probably be one of their biggest shows since their tour at Wembley last year. They played the Olympic Park Stadium this year, but you know, I suppose it's probably just because it's Reading Festival. It's historically a very big rock festival, and I think usually you do tend to get one classic act in there, and I think, you know, they've been going for nearly 20 years now, the Foo Fighters, so regardless, I think it's time for them to come back. Obviously 2012 to 2019 is a long old gap, so I think that would be a fair assumption to guess that they would be coming back. I don't think they'll be releasing a new album in between now and then, but they're the Foo Fighters. They can headline that festival. So in that same category of older bands that are in your kind of legendary status, we're talking 4, 5 albums plus. It's been a while since Green Day's headlined. Now I'm not the biggest fan of Green Day, but they certainly have a massive following around the world. So potential for them, maybe. I hope not, but maybe. Next in that category is Mumford Sons. They're about to release a new album. They're an absolutely enormous band, Grammy nominated, and have headlined before. So I don't know how I feel about that. So I think it might be a good case of having them. I don't know if the new album's going to be any good, but it's certainly going to be big because it is Mumford Sons, and every album they do is huge. And now they're out of their kind of folky sound and just into big anthemic band music, so I think it makes sense for them to potentially headline. But that's the kind of thing, you know, when you look at big American rock bands or even big British rock bands, there aren't that many that are either together anymore or are kind of ready for festival headliner slots. You know, I think the Libertines are very much a local festival kind of act now. Oasis aren't together. I don't see Damon Albarn and Blur reforming anytime soon. Pulp maybe, but do they have the same pull they used to? I don't think kids listen to The Cure anymore. They're your British bands. American bands, unfortunately, I don't think Linkin Park are touring anymore. That's really sad, but I don't see that being a headline slot. Rage Against the Machine, the massive American band. Again, I haven't seen them play a festival slot in years. In fact, I don't think they've played in the UK since 2008. So I would imagine it's probably down to one of those two bands to take that kind of old legendary slot. There needs to be some bigger rock bands, man. So the next slot is something that I think we'll see more and more of. Eminem took it 2 years ago, Kendrick took it this year. I think we're going to start seeing a big urban hip-hop act, a rapper. And there's only two really for me that I can see are big enough, maybe three, are big enough and have enough swagger to play that, or are alternative enough without being too mainstream. And I think, bearing in mind that Giggs brought him out 2 years ago, I wouldn't be surprised if Drake headlined. He has an enormous following. He plays absolute sold out tours. He juggles between the mainstream and the hip hop scene quite well, and I think would be a really good booking. I'd definitely love to see Drake. To go back to Drake, he's also released an album this year, so you know he's in that current category. Alternatively, and I would love this, Kanye West. I think that would really piss off a lot of rock fans, and I kind of like that. Do not get me wrong, I love rock music. I spend most of my time listening to punk, but I also love how internet geeky they've got recently with regards to this festival, and anything that winds them up more and more is hilarious. So I think, you know, Kanye West to headline. He's got an album coming out, another album coming out in the next year. He released Yay this year, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw him headline. He's definitely big enough. He's definitely big enough. And to go back to talking about the needs to headline, I think usually also it helps if they've got some form of album on the horizon or have released one in the last 12 to 18 months. So I think that, yeah, Kanye, Drake, definitely. The only other person I could see that is kind of big and legendary enough to headline would be Jay-Z. I think Jay-Z maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, probably a bigger person than he is now. I think that he's very much tied up touring with Beyonce, and I'd be very shocked if I saw Beyonce headlining weddings. So I don't see that being. I don't quite see him headlining, but you know he was on that list of people that Reading sent out as potential headliners. So we shall see. And so the final kind of category that you have, obviously it's a 3-day weekend, is your kind of dark horse, slightly left field, up and coming kind of act. In some years they have more of these headlining. 2016 was a prime one with 5 headliners over 3 days, and they had lots of acts who you probably wouldn't say could hold the bill on their own, but certainly have the ability to headline. I think putting Fall Out Boy and Biffy Clyro together probably makes a lot of sense. I think putting Disclosure and Foles together also makes a lot of sense. Do I think any of those could headline by themselves? Well, Biffy have now, and Fall Out Boy have now, but Fall Out Boy's set was not very busy this year. So I don't know is the answer. But I think there are a few artists who are ready for the headline slot and can hold the bill by themselves. Number one is Florence and the Machine. She hasn't headlined Reading before. She is the biggest, and I think actually, do you know what, and prove me wrong, Garbage and Paramore, I cannot think of another band with a female front singer that's headlined Reading. Florence is without a doubt the biggest female alternative act in the UK, and she's never headlined. Reading Festival have been scrutinised for their lack of female inclusion in their acts over the last few years, so this seems like an easy win for them. She's definitely ready for that gig. She's headlined Glastonbury for fuck's sake, so I wouldn't be surprised if we saw her. So yeah, I absolutely think it's time for Florence to headline that festival. It makes complete sense to me, and I'm absolutely astounded that she hasn't done it up until now. Her latest album's incredible, so she's definitely rife for it. But in terms of new acts that are breaking through, one of the bands that I think potentially, and is a strong rumour, is Bring Me the Horizon. There's somewhat of a tradition that if you play a secret set one year, you come back and headline the next year. Green Day did it a few years ago. Wolf Alice did it last year. They played in the Festival Republic and then headlined the NME tent. So I'm not saying necessarily that they would headline the main stage. And in fact, I don't think they're big enough to headline the main stage, but who knows what a year can do. And this new album of theirs is getting such a huge push from the BBC and Radio 1. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing someone like that headline. I certainly really like what's coming out of their camp at the moment, and it would be good to see a big British rock band headline. So potentially Bring Me the Horizon. That would be a weird lineup, having someone like Foo Fighters or Green Day, Drake or Kanye, and then Bring Me the Horizon. But you know, it would certainly be a risky move for Melvin Ben and Festival Republic, and that would be quite cool. So maybe Bring Me the Horizon. But the last band that I think would make sense based on the closing of their trilogy of albums is the 1975. New album due for release shortly. A huge following worldwide. You know, I think they're one of those bands. They're the top of their game. They're the top of their field. They're commercially successful whilst also being fan favourites. They've got a huge cult following, but they're also mega successful. And I think they could sit quite comfortably with all of those artists that I've named previously. So I mean, that would be my guess if I had to guess. They're kind of my go-tos for this year. I'd be very surprised if it was anyone but those list of people. But it's probably worth saying that I don't think I've ever guessed the lineup correctly in the last 10 years of going to this festival. So by no means is this gospel, but it's the end of October, and bar last year, usually this means we're due an announcement. I hope we don't have to wait like we did last time, so we shall see. Let me know what you think. I'd love to know who you think's gonna. There's a parakeet flying past my door. I'd love to know who you think's gonna headline. Pop it in the comments below. If there's any inside knowledge, then do it. Let's start getting some rumour mills going. That's what this whole thing's about. Anyway, thank you for watching. You've made it to the end. I really appreciate it. Right, I'll see you next time for some more Reading videos.